Very glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. And Jim, I feel like for the second consecutive week, we can go back to one of your classic lines of, this week has felt like a long year. And so from everything we've really gone through in the last week and a half, it's just been kind of a fire hose of reacting to the murder of Charlie Kirk himself, and then all these ancillary things, the fallout that has come from Jimmy Kimmel, which we'll talk about a little bit more today, to all sorts of different ramifications of that. But we'll also be talking a little bit more about Kamala Harris and her score settling from 2024, which is actually looking to be far more entertaining than we first suspected. And we'll also take a look at Antifa, and especially Donald Trump's efforts to designate them as a terrorist organization. And so, Jim, I can't imagine how relieved you are that we are about to hit another weekend.
You know, Greg, I try not to use what I realized was a verbal crutch of there's a lot to unpack here. But on everything that's going on, there actually is a lot to unpack here. And I just might as well just dive right into it.
Well, the best way to be prepared to unpack all this stuff is to get a good night's sleep. And there's no better place to get that than on your mattress from Brooklyn Bedding. I cannot rave about this mattress any more than I already have. But let me just tell you, it's my favorite mattress that I've ever had. It's been comfortable from day one. It supports me well. That's exactly what Mrs. Carumba says as well, that she feels like every shoulder, every hip, everything. That's just a really good mattress, and it's cooling. You're not too hot. That with the specific model that we got, the Aurora Lux cooling model, we could not rave more about Brooklyn Bedding.
Listeners and viewers, are you like me in that you just want to go back to bed based on how the day has started? Well, Brooklyn Bedding knows sleep is not one size fits all. That's why they offer mattresses for everybody with every sleep style, even in hard to find sizes. And if you're not sure which mattress is the right one for you, you just take the Brooklyn Bedding Sleep Quiz, and they will tell you what your perfect match is. By the way, it's regarding mattresses, not people. They're not a dating service. It's just what you're sleeping on, not who you're sleeping with. But they will find you your match, the perfect match, in under 2 minutes.
Go to brooklynbedding.com and use our promo code 3ML at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com and use the promo code 3ML for 30% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know that we sent you. Well, Jim, there's been so much going on that our good martini actually happened a couple of days ago. So let's dig into that now. President Trump, as he is so often wont to do, announces big things via social media. And this was his truth post the other day, where he says, "I'm pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designated Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Now, others in the media are scratching their heads on this, saying that this designation is confusing because Antifa has no official leadership or organization structure, CBS says. The president also lacks authority to designate domestic terrorist organizations. And so, Jim, the legal framework of these groups, however we want to call them, maybe they're a bunch of small groups, whatever, we know they're out there. They've caused a tremendous amount of destruction, from the 2020 riots to the siege at the Portland Federal Building for seemingly a very long time. And they're whenever there's unrest or controversy in this country, they seem to show up at the worst possible times. And so you got to applaud Trump's effort to rein them in, but can he actually do this?
Yeah, let me say this is a qualified good martini. Look, if you follow conservative media, you probably know exactly what Antifa is. You've probably known about it for close to a decade now, and you know that while the guys in black masks and black outfits can show up at any time there's a protest or gathering or something, they've been really active in the Pacific Northwest, really active in places like Portland, and they've become a real problem. Not just marching around and vandalism, sometimes really serious crimes. And I laid a couple of their more infamous moments in a Morning Jolt earlier this week. So President Trump is correct that whether or not the shooter of Charlie Kirk was ever formally affiliated with this, and I understand the the Christopher Wray argument that Antifa is an ideology. It's a movement. It's not necessarily a formal organization. Doesn't mean the people who are following that ideology or movement can't do a considerable amount of damage and commit, pretty serious crimes. And I always felt like that Wray answer was technically accurate, but maybe felt a little bit like shrugging off the responsibility of law enforcement when there's this burgeoning threat out there. Congressional Research Service, when Congress has questions, they turn to these folks who put together these reports. They did one in 2023 that was really good. And they pointed out that, unlike foreign terrorism, the federal government does not have a mechanism to formally charge a person with domestic terrorism. They have ideologies of different groups, and they said that because they're not, you're not charged with foreign terrorism as a charge, it makes it a little bit tougher to say who qualifies as a domestic terrorist. They also kind of went through and pointed out that because of this, FBI and Homeland Security, they have a national strategy for it, but they still, it's very hard to say, when does your First Amendment protected activity turn into something that the government should be keeping an eye on, and you should be, looking at you as a potential domestic terrorist. So my sense is that it would be really good to have we may have reached the point where it's a good idea to have a clear definition of what a domestic terrorist is under the law. Maybe it should be a criminal charge that can be added to other criminal charges. And I get, Trump declaring on Truth Social that this is now a thing that's happening. That's a less than ideal format. I think we probably need something that'd be good to have. We could pass legislation. Greg, didn't our founders set up 3 branches of government?
Yes.
It feels a lot of days. I feel like it's just 2. And there was this dome thing. There was this dome in Washington. Dear Congress, look, probably would be helpful if there were a federal law that clarified what domestic terrorism is, what's sufficient threshold of evidence for a federal law enforcement investigation, and when somebody could be charged as a domestic terrorist. The fact that this has been muddy in the past doesn't mean that it has to be muddy before. Yes, there are legit, the First Amendment protects your right to say the government sucks, and all that stuff. The federal government, the Constitution does not protect your right to commit crimes. And we have a very clear definition of what those crimes are. So now the question is, if you've got domestic terrorists who have not committed a crime yet, but they are plotting to commit a crime, can the federal government wiretap them? Can the federal government, obviously you want them to intervene before they blow something up, but then the question is it obtaining explosives? Is it just simply planning? When does it become sufficient reason? So I think it'd be very good, we can have, at the risk of cliche, we can have a national dialogue on this. Or at minimum, we probably should have clarity. But I think, Trump, we have basically tried to downplay and hand wave away the notion of Antifa as a serious problem for a decade. It has not gone away. And in fact, I think after cases like this, it's perfectly appropriate for the government to say, hey, what we've been doing in the past hasn't worked. It's time for a new approach. It probably involves classifying this group, even if it doesn't have a specified leader, even if it doesn't have a very organized structure. It would be really nice if there were an Antifa headquarters in Portland somewhere that we could, track and, that's where they are. But, the fact that you can't stop an ideology or you can't, criminalize an ideology does not mean that if people involved in that ideology want to commit crimes, you cannot intervene and do something to prevent harm to the public.
Yeah, you mentioned the Congressional Research Service. This is the CBS report. Describes Antifa as decentralized, lacking a unifying organizational structure or detailed ideology. Instead, it consists of, quote, independent, radical, like-minded groups and individuals, unquote. So, okay, if there's not one group, maybe there's a lot of groups here, and maybe those need to be looked into. You also need to track the money. Trump's entirely right about that, because giant pallets of bricks in the summer of 2020 didn't just show up on their own. I don't think people are walking into the local hardware store and just grabbing that.
Hey, Greg, in the 1990s, who was the king of the militia movement? They had a formal leadership. They were all connected, right? There was, there was that big election where Tim McVeigh was. No, there wasn't, right? Everything they're saying, describing Antifa, probably applies to militia movements, white nationalist movements, all kinds of, anti-government, right-wing groups out there. They're decentralized. Yeah, they operate in small groups, and yeah, they're kind of loose. And there are probably a lot of guys who are big talkers online, but who are never actually going to do something, or you're looking at them and maybe it seems like they're going further down the rabbit hole. They're getting right. I'm going to recognize law enforcement does not always have the easiest decisions in these sorts of things, in investigating these matters. But everything we can do for right-wing violence seems like something we should be able to do for left-wing violence. And as much as, yeah, they're decentralized. Decentralized groups can still be very dangerous, as we've seen with Islamist terrorism. So, yeah, I think you got to, look into this, even if it is going to be a significant law enforcement challenge.
Yeah, and last point here, I'm not certainly the first person to make this point, but in the last week and a half since this horrific murder, Jim, has there been one arson, business vandalized, just general mayhem in the streets? I don't know what the equivalent would have been on the other side. Maybe it's Bernie or AOC at one of their oligarchy rallies. Do you think the streets would look a little bit differently over the last week and a half if it had happened in the opposite direction?
Look, you and I talked the late morning, midday after. And, when something like this happens, it's natural to think, oh, God, I hope there's not a copycat. Oh, God, I hope there's not some, somebody who thinks that they're helping by retaliatory violence against a left. It's not crazy to think about that. Yesterday in the corner, I wrote a short item saying a couple things have gone right. As of this recording, that's me knocking on wood, it's not the workers, just kind of observing that it's been a week and we hadn't seen terrible case. We had some nut job try to trash a Charlie Kirk memorial. We've seen bad behavior, but we have not seen violence as of this recording, and that's good to see. And yeah, a lot of yahoos have said inappropriate things. I'm kind of foreshadowing our next martini. But I was struck, and I quoted this interview with Jamie Lee Curtis, the actress, who said, looks like I vehemently disagreed with everything Charlie Kirk said, but she mentioned how she hoped he had felt close to God in his final moments, and she just thought about him being as a father and as a husband, and she cheered up, and she says, I'd never want to see that footage of him being shot ever again. And thank you, Jamie Lee Curtis. There are people out there on the left side of the aisle who are horrified by this, who are shocked by this, who don't want to see it. Apparently Rainn Wilson had said something along, so first of all, for those celebrities out there who are left of center and who can find it to say, oh my God, this is terrible, nobody should have something like this happen to them, thank you. I think we need more of that. I think, I'd like to think that if things happened the other way around, that, you would see conservatives saying this is awful. I think most people reacted very appropriately when those two Minnesota lawmakers were shot. Mm-hmm. Other than Mike Lee, based Mike Lee became debased Mike Lee. I wrote a whole column about that. Not that anybody remembers. And that it just is we got to remember the people we disagree with are human beings. And the vast majority of Americans get that. There are a couple of people out there who let their emotions run away with them. So let's not forget the good cases, but also, unfortunately, there are some really bad ones. And we'll be talking about one of them in just a few moments.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So in the meantime, how's your business doing here at the end of this week? Hopefully it's doing fine. Hopefully the outlook looks great. And yes, there are conditions that you can't control. Interest rates, markets, tax rates, inflation, all those things. But there are things you can control. You know what you have to get done, and you know how much time you have during the day, and you know where your energy is best spent. It's best spent on looking forward and attracting new customers and doing all the things that help your business move forward. It's not the data entry type things that have to get done, but you really don't want to be doing because your time is best spent elsewhere. So let AI do that for you, and there's no better way to do it than NetSuite by Oracle.
NetSuite by Oracle brings your accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR all into one fluid platform. So when you're closing the books in days instead of weeks, that means you're spending less time looking backwards and more time focusing on what's next. So whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, and if you are, good for you. But you probably need NetSuite by Oracle because it helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities.
And speaking of opportunities, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. Again, that's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, as our regular listeners know, we spent a lot of time yesterday in the first martini on the indefinite suspension, won't officially call it cancellation yet, I guess, of Jimmy Kimmel as the late night host on ABC. And there was a lot of different talk going on about why this happened. Of course, it definitely stems from his comments on Monday night, where he said flat out, incorrectly, intentionally incorrectly, I would say, that the right was trying to distract people from the fact that the killer of Charlie Kirk was one of their own. By then, it was blatantly obvious that that wasn't the case, made even more obvious by The charges coming down, I believe, the next day. And so, as we talked about yesterday, there was an affiliate revolt. And there was also an effort by ABC to get Jimmy Kimmel to clarify or maybe even apologize, both of which he refused to do. And so the Hollywood Reporter has basically dug into this, and it says that Disney CEO Bob Iger and the co-chair Dana Walden made the decision to suspend Kimmel's show after he planned to double down and go on camera to defend his lie that MAGA voters killed Charlie Kirk, rather than kowtow, that's Kimmel's word, I think, to the outrage. There had also been some death threats, allegedly, to some staffers of his, which is horrible and should never happen. But then the advertiser calls began to roll in, and then the big affiliate conglomerates of Nexstar and Sinclair threatened to preempt the show. And this is not at all tied to the comments from FCC Chair Brendan Carr. And basically, they were looking at losing 66 of the 200 affiliates that they have if the change wasn't made. And when Kimmel refused to do what Iger and Walden were encouraging him to do, they pulled the plug. And so, like we said yesterday, if that had been the whole story, that would have been fine. That would have been clean. But of course, Brendan Carr had been talking about it on podcasts and other interviews and how he hoped it would happen. He was encouraging it to happen. And that definitely doesn't help. And then also yesterday, as the news came down, because you know he can't stay out of it, you got Donald Trump coming out on this as well. And he says, "Great news for America. The ratings challenge Jimmy Kimmel show is canceled. Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. That leaves Jimmy and Seth, two total losers on fake news NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC. President Donald J. Trump." And so, even though this was going to happen, the narrative now is that the FCC was directly in contact with ABC and pushing for this to happen. All the administration had to do at every level was absolutely nothing. But now you've got things like this happening. Here's Colbert's reaction last night. The Gulf of America fits into that. But Jim, obviously it would have been a lot cleaner if they just let the market forces take their course. And now this narrative is something the administration's got to deal with because people couldn't stop talking.
Yeah. For listeners out there who really didn't like listening to or watching Stephen Colbert in that segment, this is a short-term problem.
Yes, that'll be over in May.
This will take care of itself in another couple months there. But I'm struck by, again, we keep getting into this dynamic where the left says Donald Trump is acting like an autocrat, and a bunch of folks on the right say, no, it wasn't him acting like an autocrat. It wasn't him being a dictator. It's totally different. And then Trump feels the need to jump onto social media and say, no, it totally was me, and I am absolutely acting like an autocrat. It was all me. I was doing it. I gave the order. I fired the it just was this. Trump, feels the need to stick the fork into the electrical socket every single time, no matter how many times you tell him don't do that. My colleague Jeff Blahar has this very good column out this morning, pointing out this is the way Trump wants it. He wants to be feared. He wants people to believe that he has the power to make these sorts of things happen. So I think there's just something extraordinarily self-destructive out there. Brendan Carr did not need to do this, should not have done this. Brendan Carr, the private citizen, can say Jimmy Kimmel stinks as much as he wants. Brendan Carr, the guy who has regulatory authority over ABC and its affiliates, really should not be saying this sort of thing. But I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to ask listeners, put yourself into the shoes of Bob Iger and just imagine how he sees the world. And I'm sure the moment you do that, your first thought is, stop letting Kathleen Kennedy ruin Star Wars. But that's not what I want to talk about here. Marvel needs to get back to the classic. No, you have this talk show host. So like something really terrible has happened and emotions are running high. People are really, conservatives are still upset, heartbroken, grieving, angry. And your late night host goes out and says something really stupid. He asserts that this was right on right violence and that the left wing the left has had no role in this. If Jimmy Kimmel had said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Wow, I got that so wrong. I was following stuff on Blue Sky. I was following Lawrence Tribe. I got bad information." And he went out there and he really wanted to be contrite. And then the problem with the situation could have died down. And there'd still be people irked about it. But instead, Kimmel's like, no, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to give these guys, a taste. I'm going to show these guys that, like he wants to. He's in a bad situation, and he wants to keep digging. He's getting himself deeper in that hole. He wants to throw gasoline onto this fire, right? If you're Bob Iger, telling Jimmy Kimmel, you need to cool off. You go to the timeout chair, take a vacation, take a breather. You need to be in a different mindset if you're going to be hosting this show. We can't have you going out there and basically demonizing a whole, like, it's not great to be demonizing people in general. This is a really bad time to be running around demonizing conservatives, and the affiliates are upset. They are justifiably upset. What if you told a joke? Could you try that? Would that be just a different change of pace here or something? But just one last point, don't make death threats to Jimmy Kimmel's staffers. Don't make death threats to Jimmy Kimmel. Don't make death threats. You can just stop right there. That's not a good way to help this situation. But I wrote about this today, kind of jumping on yesterday's comments and my jokes about reorganizing my sock drawer. I get that the First Amendment is there to protect everybody, including jerks like Jimmy Kimmel. But Jimmy Kimmel is not just saying, stand up for my right to speak my mind. He's also saying, help me keep my $16 million a year job, right? Where I get to like rip into you conservatives all, every night, 5 nights a week. There's nothing you can do about it. You almost never hear me, rip into any Democrat or anything like that. And now it's turned into a cause. Like, I understand that Eric Swalwell was wearing a Jimmy Kimmel cap on his news presentation. Greg, look, I as much as we like to mock him, Eric Swalwell's not a guy you want to mess with. He will show you his fangs. So, like, he's turned to this big cause of a lot of lefties. And we have to stand up for the First Amendment. And, like, a whole bunch of people on the right are like, Charlie Kirk just had his First Amendment rights ended by a bullet. Right? Like we're really, it really, there is still so much anger and hurt out there that I don't think it does any good for the left or for Hollywood or for anybody else to say, and now is the time where we all have to stand up and defend Jimmy Kimmel. I think nobody on the right wants to hear it right now. He's really not the victim in this story. He's really not the poor guy who's going to be it is he chose to make these statements, and then he chose to double down, and that's why he's in this situation. And I think that's, a lot of this is just natural consequences. And the other thing, my point today is, like, just in today's morning newsletter, Kimmel's been such a jerk for so long. Like, Trump in his Truth Social post goes after Jimmy Fallon. I know Jimmy Fallon is not a conservative, but I don't know, I don't get the feeling Jimmy Fallon looks at conservatives with contempt. He had Trump on his show, I think, before the 2016 election, got a lot of grief for it. I think Jimmy Fallon just wants to host dance parties. He just wants to sing silly songs and slow jam the news. I don't get that same contempt vibe that I get from Jimmy Kimmel. So I think if Fallon had ever screwed up like this, there'd probably be a little bit more sympathy. There'd probably a little bit more tendency to, okay, you screwed up, but we can forgive this. Kimmel, the headline in today's Jolt is "Karma Catches Up to Jimmy Kimmel," and I kind of feel like that's what's here. Does this mean the First Amendment doesn't apply? No, I didn't want to see Brendan Carr saying this stuff. But if everybody's not so motivated to help out Jimmy Kimmel, it's because of his record. Going back to hosting the show in January 2003, Greg, his show is older than ours.
Going back quite a ways. Yeah, the lesson here for the right is when your enemy is, not enemy, but adversary is imploding.
Yes, your opponent,
Get out of the way. Just stay out of the way. So that was not adhered to, and so it makes things more complicated because the left will grab onto any stitch of whatever they can to point the blame in that direction. So, but ultimately, this was Kimmel's own doing for sure. So, all right. Well, as we head into the weekend, you feeling good? Any concerns about aches or pains or whether you're breathing right or anything like that? Well, head to ZocDoc and you will find the right doctor, whether they're well regarded with great reviews, whether they're available, whether they take your insurance, all kinds of things. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high quality in-network doctors and then click to instantly book an appointment.
Greg, let's say you're a late night talk show host and they've told you, the network has told you, don't show up for work for a while. We'll let you know you're probably going through a tough time. And so maybe you want to speak to a therapist. Maybe you want to speak to, maybe it's giving you chest pains. I don't know, but whatever it is, if you want to talk to a doctor with ZocDoc, you can book in network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty of medical care, from mental health to dental health. I think Kimmel's teeth look fine. Primary care, urgent care, and more. You can filter for the doctors who have your insurance plan, see if they're located nearby, are they a good fit for any medical needs you may have, and see if they are highly rated by verified patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, Jim, quickly on to our third martini now. The fun just keeps coming out of this Kamala Harris memoir from the 2024 campaign. We just talked last week about how it was reckless for Joe Biden to run again. But more juicy stuff now. As you report in today's Morning Jolt, just before she went on for the one debate with Trump, she gets a call from Biden who says, "Hey, my brother told me you've been bad-mouthing me, and now donors in Philadelphia are thinking about not kicking in." And so she's like, "Why are you telling me this like 5 minutes before I go on stage?" And then the other big bombshell is that while she personally has great affection for Tim Walz, she increasingly thought that he wasn't doing a great job. She thought he was too friendly to J.D. Vance in the debate. And ultimately, she says that she wishes she had gone with Pete Buttigieg, not Josh Shapiro, Pete Buttigieg. She writes, "He would have been an ideal partner if I were a straight white man, but we were already asking a lot of America to accept a woman, a black woman married to a Jewish man. But knowing what was at stake, it was too big of a risk." And so there's a lot of insults to America right there if you listen closely enough. But Jim, Shapiro was the leader in the clubhouse. She didn't like him because he asked too many questions about what his job would be for 4 or 8 years as opposed to the next 3 months on the campaign trail. And so I think she basically crumbled to the social media pressure from the farther left that it should be Tim Walz. And then, surprise, surprise, it didn't pan out too well.
So listeners, I'm going to let you in on, let's say a secret, but something. So National Review asked, did you want to review the Kamala Harris book? And I was like, heck yes, I can't wait. I don't have an advanced copy, and I'm frustrated by this because clearly some people do, and they're already, putting out some of the juiciest parts. But one, Greg, I can't wait. I just think this sounds so juicy. But also a sense of I honestly feel an element of good for you, Kamala Harris. Not so much in of course she's blaming everybody but herself. Of course she had a very big role in why she was defeated. It's very hard to say that she had no role in any of this. But just because she's diverting blame doesn't mean that some of these other people don't deserve some blame. And I don't think it's a wild or crazy assertion to say that Tim Walz really was underwhelming in his debate. That Elmer Fudd, fearful, wide-eyed, deer in the headlights look. And the interesting thing, so she says Buttigieg, and we'd always kind of figured that Harris and Buttigieg were kind of rivals. And it sounds like, she's like, Pete and I get along really well. Pete Buttigieg was asked about this by Politico yesterday, and he says, "I just believe in giving Americans more credit than that." So he says that they did not talk about him being, the problems of nominating a gay man as her running mate. So I think Buttigieg is like, don't blame me. Don't, I wasn't, I don't get any of that on me. I'm not, or does the slogan "too gay for Kamala Harris," is that something that helps him in 2028? Does that hurt him in 2028? I don't know. If you're a Republican and you're running against Tim Walz for governor of Minnesota in 2026, look, you're always going to have an uphill climb, but Tim Walz even disappointed Kamala Harris seems like really, that's a zinger you could uncork in a debate or put in an attack ad or something like that. It'll be very interesting to see if Walz comes out and makes any statement about this. The Shapiro thing, it does sound weird. Oh, he also said, issued a statement that was kind of along the lines of, this is not true. Everything I had said I was completely focused on defeating Donald Trump, and this is absurd. So that kind of is an interesting counter. I think also it's an indication that my first thought was, okay, she does not want to run for 2028. She knows it's never going to happen. So now she's venting her spleen. She's spilling the tea. She's putting it all out there. And then it's like, well, maybe you're trying to, maybe you don't want Josh Shapiro to run in 3.5 years. You don't want Tim Walz to run. You kind of want to, take these guys out. I don't know if there's, some ricochet play she has in mind. I also don't think, all of you failed me, therefore you owe me another shot as the nominee. I don't think that's going to be a resonant message in 2028. I think Democrats really want to put this behind them. However, for all the Democrats who are dreading this book and saying they don't want to go through these arguments again, you can't know why you can't win unless you understand why you lost. And if the problem was just Harris and Walz, and the same platform, the same policies, the same approach to American national life, okay, you can try that. I don't she was flawed, no doubt. Tim Walz was flawed, no doubt. But I think there was a more fundamental problem there. And I think it's the agenda. I think that a lot of Americans look at what Democrats worry about, and they're like, that's not me. That's not, I want the economy. I'm worried about immigration. This, I think in the end, she just came across as somebody who did not understand the problems of people like me, as they say in the polls. So I'm looking forward to this. I think this is fascinating. I think it's a little kind of funny. I think we're getting a whole, you know what this is, Greg, to get, for our Gen X audience?
What?
It's the real world. This is what happens when people stop being polite and start being real. And I think she's had these feelings about these other Democrats for a long time. The other thing, which I'm just about to put in a corner post, probably by the time people hear this, it'll be up there. There's another excerpt of the Washington Post that says her team told her on the Friday before Election Day that she was leading in all 7 swing states. Now, as careful listeners, she went 0 for 7, right? So problem one, the other is also was David Plouffe said on Pod Save America that their internal polling never had them ahead. So somebody's not telling the truth here. Or maybe she was getting a sugar-coated version of the... I know. There's something that's not adding up here. And then the other thing is, remember, Greg, this campaign spent $1.5 billion in 17 weeks, right? You figure they've got every polling, public opinion measuring doodad, gizmo, and I'm picturing a Rube Goldberg thing of just... And they thought they were up in all 7? And they ended up going 0 for 7, right? Somebody got hosed. Somebody got scammed on that one. So I'm hoping she names names. We will see how this shakes out. But, Greg, this may be the book of the... I am, no offense to the great Brad Thor. No offense to all the great thriller writers out there. I can't wait to read Kamala Harris's book.
Well, they didn't like
Feel
to give
good book
Biden...
of the year.
They didn't like to give Biden bad news. They probably didn't want to give her bad news either. So interesting quote real quickly from Buttigieg. You referred to it a little bit. He says, "My experience in politics has been that the way you earn trust with voters is based mostly on what they think you're going to do for their lives, not on categories," which is a very Mackenzian answer. But it's also probably the right answer instead of, falling on identity politics like Harris was trying to explain there. Here's the thing, though. If it weren't for identity politics, we would have no idea who Pete Buttigieg is. And here's my proof. 2020 campaign, 2 mid-sized city mayors ran for president on the Democratic side. One was Pete Buttigieg, and the other was Wayne Messam. I don't know if you remember a lot about Wayne Messam, but he was the mayor, still is, of Miramar, Florida, which is actually bigger than South Bend, Indiana. But he got no oxygen, got no polling, got no fundraising, didn't end up on a debate stage, had to drop out. Pete Buttigieg, of course, gets tons of media attention because of one single fact. It's not what he did in South Bend, Indiana. It's the fact that he's a gay candidate and he'd be the only one up there on the stage who was so. And so the fact that he has advanced as far as he is mainly on that, because if you can point to accomplishments in South Bend, if you can point to accomplishments at the Department of Transportation, I'll listen. But I mean, there's pretty much one reason for Pete Buttigieg's rise in national politics.
Now, Greg, that's not true. Pete Buttigieg also went to Harvard. Genuinely, to his credit, he served in the military.
That's true.
Also, importantly, he was at McKinsey Consulting. And at McKinsey, we believe that your biggest problem is also your biggest opportunity. I have a 24-point PowerPoint display that's going to basically say you need to pay more. he had charisma. He had other attributes, but yes, indisputably a huge chunk of his coverage in that 2020 primary process. We should really emphasize the 2019 primary process.
Sure.
Was that, hey, wow, look at this guy. And 4 years ago, somebody had written some profile column about him when he was mayor, saying this man might be the first gay president of the United States. So that's always been a centerpiece of how he was, fairly or unfairly. So. But I get that, in that comment today, Pete Buttigieg's like, don't get that identity politics stuff on me. It's not good. It doesn't work anymore. I got a beard now. I'm running as the slender version of J.D. Vance, so.
Amazing.
Good luck, Mayor Pete. Yeah.
Yeah, not really, though. Anyway, on to the weekend, Jim. I'll see you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific weekend. Join us again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.